Dr. Damon Williams, we met for breakfast this morning, and if you read the bio that's inside of this printed document that you got, it's all true. And as far as we were concerned after breakfast with him, he has a lot of experience to share here with the University of Alabama. He's going to speak about diversity as a process. He's been invited to more than 250 campuses to speak. His research have great resonance to colleges and universities as we adjust to demographics of historic proportions, rising costs, and educational policies struggling to meet the demands of a global economy. He has served on the faculties of the University of Connecticut and Wisconsin, where he was the Chief Diversity Officer. He's presently Executive Vice President of the 4,500 Boys and Girls Clubs of America. He's a busy person with a lot of balls in the air, and he handles them beautifully. Higher education, diversity, and the 21st century global economy, a perfect storm. Dr. Williams.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Check 1, 2. Is the mic hot? How's everybody doing today? Good, good. It's so wonderful to be here at the great University of Alabama and to have the pleasure to address you and share a bit of time today to discuss a topic that I think is of incredible importance, and that's this topic of higher education, diversity, the global economy, and how they're coming together in what I believe is truly a perfect storm dynamic. The challenge of diversity and inclusion. Our institution is struggling with campus diversity and needs to find a way to turn the corner. How can we do it? Where do we start? How can we truly make a difference? How can we prioritize diversity in tough economic times? How do we overcome the culture of the racial history of segregation and challenge? What about the issues of gender and STEM, the clash of globalization and domestic diversity, the need to include all learners? We have a diversity plan, but is it enough? Can you tell us what to do? Can you help? We need the force. Save us, Obi-Wan Williams. You're our only hope. Now, as you can see, I am indeed a huge fan of the Star Wars series, and in light of that series coming to the cinema yet again very soon, I wanted to begin with that idea of the force and that idea of how in many instances I go to campuses and I'm asked, what is the thing that we need to do to make change happen today? Now, I do consider myself to be a Jedi, someone strong in the force of strategic diversity leadership, capable of making incredible things happen each and every day, but the issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the issue of moving our campuses forward, indeed is an issue of epic challenge and one that takes far more than a simple lightsaber to engage. However, as I am often wont to do, I did consult the wisdom of Master Yoda before coming here today, and I wanted to share with you what he shared with me. Strongest is the culture with this one. Colleges and universities are most resistant to change. Nebulous and multiple goals they have. Decentralized environments are prevalent. Shared governance confounds the greatest of leaders. Faculty and staff, they live long in the life of the campus. Conflicting ideas regarding diversity and inclusion persist. Loosely coupled systems make the future difficult to see. Ritualistic and symbolic are their planning efforts, not focused on real change and deep transformation. Difficult will be the process of transforming the culture. Difficult will be the process of implementing a new campus-wide paradigm of strategic diversity leadership. Difficult will be the process of achieving inclusive excellence. Strong you must be in your resolve. Proceed forward with caution. Those were the messages that were provided to me prior to coming to the great University of Alabama. An institution steeped in a deep culture with respect to this work, a culture that is more special probably than 99% of all institutions in this nation. a history that has shaped the very character of what happens not just in higher education, but shaped and been a part of the character of what happens at the K through 12 level, at the access to opportunity level, and indeed has shaped the discourse of what it means to be free in the 21st century. At the core of this work of how we truly engage in the business of transformation, the first lesson that I want to provide to you is that that work must be engaged as culture change. It must be engaged as culture change. What exists at the broad level of culture, if we refer to Edgar Sheen's legendary model, the MIT organizational learning professor, he will talk about this idea of organizational cultures having multiple overlapping layers. At the broadest rim of culture is what we refer to as the geospatial level of culture. The geospatial is very simply maybe the pictures that exist on a wall. Do those pictures depict ethnic, racially diverse faces? Do those pictures depict women? Do those pictures send a message of inclusion? Or perhaps do those pictures depict a message of homogeneity? Where is the cultural center? Does it sit in a basement, subterranean to some place on campus? Or is it in the heart of the student center? What do our fraternity and sorority houses look like? Are those spaces homogeneous spaces, or are those spaces of inclusion? All of those dynamics establish the cultural phenomena of our institutions at the broadest level in terms of our environment. But in addition to that broad space of culture, there's also traditions, there's myths, there's symbols, there's rituals. And each and every one of those things also informs the culture of our institutions. At Texas A&M University, when the students don't like something that go on, they go because they're the rattlers. And that is a part of the cultural tradition of that institution, of how students engage in dissent around ideas and themes that they don't like. And so when we think about changing the institutional cultures of our environment, when we think about how we might shift the institutional narrative of the University of Alabama to pivot towards diversity, to pivot further towards democracy, to pivot further towards the times in which we find ourselves today, we must be engaged in the business of culture change. A part of that is geospatial, a part of that is symbol, ritual, and tradition. Every institution, every organizational culture has things that they espouse, things that they say they believe. And you see those things littered and strewn about our websites. You will see those things littered and strewn about our brochures. But indeed, what sits at the core of culture, what sits at the very fundamental core of culture, is the mental models and the assumptions that we have each and every day that govern how we interact with one another, that define what excellence is when we're in a faculty search committee, that defines what excellence looks like when we're making holistic admissions decisions, that defines what excellence looks like when students come into our classroom and we look at them and we see individuals who perhaps are not even ascribing to a gender, and in the ways in which we think about and embrace that individual, or the way that we rebuke them. This idea that mental models and assumptions sit at the core, and similar to a piece of fruit, a plum, very fleshy, relatively easy to manipulate at times at the outermost level of culture. But what sits at the center of our culture, hard, calcitrant, difficult to shift and move, just like it's difficult to shift and move the culture and evolve the culture of the great University of Alabama to become more engaged and more inclusive and more embracing of the world that we live in today. I begin with those points of culture because those ideas of culture frame so much of what we must do. I always take it as a gift when I have the opportunity to be in a space that is hallowed such as this, because I believe that this environment is ripe for the idea of innovation. How many of you, if any, have heard of the book, The Innovator's DNA, by raising your hand? One person, two persons, handful of persons. Little hand back there, not quite sure, maybe. The Innovator's DNA. Wonderful book, researched by a set of scholars at Harvard University that looked at this idea of innovation across context, innovation across sector, So what does a K through 12 innovator look like? What does a higher education innovator look like? What does a corporate sector or a social sector or a government innovator look like? And they engaged in this research, asking all these innovators what made them do and be successful as innovators. And they settled into a couple key themes that I want to share with you, because I believe that they center this conversation for transformation further. One is that innovators are always seeking out and asking questions, never satisfied with the status quo of what is. Asking questions about why, how, what if, how do we, what if we tried this? Question seeking. Innovators also don't limit themselves to solutions where they find themselves. To be an innovating institution is not simply to say, well, what are they doing in the SEC? To be an innovative solution builder is to say, what are they doing in the world? And how do we, as the great University of Alabama, grapple with that and find ways to make meaning of it? Innovators as well are constantly seeking other innovators. Each and every one of you here today is an innovator because you sought out this space for one reason or another. And innovators seek out other innovators because what they know is the presence of innovators in group create greater innovation possibility. The fourth and the fifth characteristics of innovators, which I believe to be so very important. The fourth, innovators have a bias towards action. So much innovation is stymied in organizational life because folks say, we can't do that. How would we do that? We don't have the funds for that. That's beyond where I sit as a staff administrator. That's beyond where I sit as a student. That's beyond what's possible as a president or a dean. Innovators have a bias towards action. And innovators, in their bias towards action, are trying to find things that work. And once they find what works, innovators want to scale up. They find what works and they want to scale up. Now, those are the 5 characteristics that the book, The Innovator's DNA, highlighted. But what I found was that that was not sufficient to truly cover what it means to innovate in the diversity, equity, inclusion, the strategic diversity leadership space. There's a 6th quality. All of you see it on the screen. Can you say it with me together? 1, 2, 3, leading with courage. Let's try it again. 1, 2, 3, leading with courage. That's right, the 6th characteristic of innovation when you talk about innovating in the diversity space. This idea that to innovate in diversity space requires us to cut against the grain. It requires us to skew towards those who are perhaps vulnerable. It perhaps causes us to give up some of those idiosyncrasy credits, some of that capital that we may have as a full professor, some of the capital we may have as members of particular student organizations on campus, some of the capitals that we may have as males, leading with courage, cutting against the grain. My life has been defined by a set of burning questions. I will share some of the answers that I've been puzzling with in this lecture. What is diversity in the 21st century? Why is it so important in the new economy? How can we engage a broad agenda of diversity and inclusion? A broad agenda that embraces race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, nationality, economic background, diversity of thought, diversity of regional background, military diversity, a broad definition of diversity. How do we embrace that broad definition but yet still not lose sight of the unique ways that different identity groups are nested in their own political context, and that the socio-historical needs of the LGBTQ community are not the same exact needs of the disability community? That individuals who are ambulatory challenged and bound by wheelchair are not the same issues as individuals who are diverse because they are part of invisible minorities in the disability community and have learning challenges. And hear me when I say this, that the challenges of race and ethnicity, the challenges of racial equity still continue to grip this nation with as much problematic dynamic as ever before. Bodies strewn on streets because folks not culturally competent, not understanding that black bodies still yet matter. Classic issues that we see play themselves out over and over again. What does it mean to lead strategically around these issues? Not just to do stuff, 5 million different things, but how do we lead strategically? How can we reimagine a pipeline into higher education, which is a part of the reason why I stepped away from higher education to join what I think is one of the great organizations of this nation, indeed of the world, the Boys and Girls Clubs of America. Because I felt I was too late in the pipeline to truly engage the boys of color crisis, too late in the pipeline to truly expand participation of STEM amongst young girls who need the spark of a mentor, who need the encouragement of engagement, too late to engage in the character building work that is so essential to citizenry in the 21st century. One of the most important topics that we find ourselves engaging around leadership development in the 21st century is ethical leadership. Ethical leadership, particularly in corporate context and healthcare context and financial service context, ethical leadership. And then the question that is the question of all questions: why is there so much conversation about change and so little seems to happen? That question right there has kept me up forever. And so I wrote books about it. Strategic Diversity Leadership, the Chief Diversity Officer, wrote books about it that really center into what I refer to as this perfect storm moment that we find ourselves in. A perfect storm moment that is powered by changing demographics, burgeoning levels of racial and ethnic diversity. Our major cities across this country have already tipped in our majority minority. Coming soon to a community year U. Fastest growing, quickest spanning, population growing, Hispanic, Latino populations everywhere in the South, everywhere in the Southeast, everywhere in the Northeast, the Midwest, and the Pacific, changing demographics, perfect storm dynamic, elevating these issues, powering this conversation that we must have to be legitimately great in the 21st century. Persistent educational challenges that we see, knowing that the full utilization of women in STEM is the solution to our challenges globally from an innovation perspective. The fact that we walk through colleges of engineering and see the most homogeneous environments that we find anywhere, questions of diversity. Indeed, in the forthcoming presidential elections, this election, as the last one, was defined and will be defined by questions of diversity. Who can put together the big tent that gets the most folks underneath it? Who can bring together conservative and progressive? Who can bring together African American and Latino? Who can bring together women? Who can bring together educated folks and working class folks? Who can bring these conversations together the best will be the next president of the United States. Questions of diversity. No longer matters of comfort and convenience. No longer matters of should we do it or should we not. Simply the world we live in today. And at the same time, other dynamics have powered the elevation of this perfect storm. The Great Recession that hit in the 05 or 06, 07, 08 years, and the implications of that Great Recession, and the backwash of what it meant when work went away for good in industrial centers across this nation. My brother, my sister-in-law, my first cousin, his wife, and 2 other cousins, all engineers, all doing the right thing, all out of work in Dayton, Ohio, when the Great Recession hit. When the manufacturing industry, as it related to the automotive sector, closed for good. Fundamentally altering the possibilities for success and the good life in those communities. Moving from a manufacturing economy to an innovation and an idea economy that each and every one of us in this room are now subject to. And those of you who are millennials and a part of this millennial generation will change your jobs over and over and over again as you now live more and more what Daniel Pink refers to as free agent nation. A world in which your success will be governed by how you're able to engage and to get after it, sharing and building and selling your personal brand and your skills in this world. A world in which it's no longer like the 60s and the 70s where we were talking about the race to the moon and educating the best and the brightest, those that lived at the top of the pyramid. But the questions in the conversation for us is, how do we create economic opportunity for all persons at all levels of the pyramid. Boys and Girls Clubs of America serving 4 million young people across this nation, indeed across this world. 67% of those young people on free or reduced lunch. About 52% of those individuals, African American, Latino, 50% boys, 50% girls. That next generation of possibility of leadership, how do we create opportunity for those young persons, and indeed all powering the perfect storm? What we refer to as the educational and the business case for diversity. The educational case for diversity, making the argument, particularly post the Michigan Supreme Court cases, that being educated in diverse learning environments was not just of educational benefit for underrepresented folks who are in those environments, but finding that being educated in diverse learning environments was of benefit for all students, irrespective of background. Because it's engagement of diversity and difference which creates greater levels of cognitive complexity. It's the bringing together of multiple perspectives. It's what we refer to at the University of Wisconsin at Madison as the need to winnow and sift through perspective, to winnow and sift through information, to winnow and sift across value systems, trying to find ever greater levels of truth, small t, revisable truths, no meta-narratives here. No hegemonic ideas of what must be here, simply revisable ideas that I present to you and share to you as my philosophy and as the result of my work. And what I believe sits at the core of this conversation in many ways and is disrupting more than any other force this idea of technology and how digital is disrupting post-secondary education just as it has disrupted all other aspects of our economy. Transforming the virtual possibility for each and every student to be a learner through a digital platform without leaving their home. Transforming the possibilities of folks who are working family members, who are head of household and have multiple responsibilities. Creating opportunities for economically scalable models that we can educate everybody at scale. Disrupting and indeed connected to diversity, powering this perfect storm. This question of framing diversity was a huge priority of the books. Framing diversity, what is it? As I said before, people ask me all the time, so Damon, tell me, what is diversity? Race, ethnicity, sexuality, gender, internationality, economic background, disability, diversity of perspective, diversity of religion, intersectionality of those ideas. All those things and so many more are part and parcel to diversity. And when I define diversity, I define it broad writ in just that fashion. At the same time, what I think becomes so important to be strategic diversity leaders is we have to pivot away from conversations of purely identity and pivot towards conversations of organizational capacity. And how are we building organizational capacity to engage and advance issues of diversity, however they defined. This is the strategic leadership goals framework that sits behind me. And at the top of that framework is this conversation of access and equity of outcomes. I really care less about what the data looks like coming in terms of head count of women in STEM, in terms of head count of African American or Latinos who are at undergrad level or grad level, or the number of Native American students. What I care about is, did you graduate? Did you complete the degree? Was there timely progression, and at what level and at what rate are we progressing and graduating students through our systems who are on the football team, who are on the basketball team, who are outputting in particular types of ways? Because it's the output which truly defines the greatness of an institution far more than the input. It's the rate of progression that are women progressing through the ladder from junior faculty to associate faculty to department chair to associate dean to dean at the same level and the same rates as their male colleagues. At what ways and how is these issues of progression, how are they happening across the board? Those questions of access, of equity and outcome. That the conversation is one of preparing all students for a diverse and global world. It's not simply about black and brown. It's not simply about LGBTQ. It's not simply about gender. It's not simply about disability. How are we preparing all of our students for the world we live in today? I happened to be at the Chicago School of Business, the Booth School of Business, not too terribly long ago for an award celebration with a dear friend of mine, Michael Armstrong, who's a global vice president for Viacom Black Entertainment International. He runs the international division. Michael was being awarded by the Booth School an honor as being the Young Leader of the Year. And so he was receiving an award as an early success story of that institution. My wife and I were at his event. We're sitting at the event, and in the conversation I'm having with a colleague who is a managing partner of one of the top 3 strategic management consulting firms in the nation, we get in a conversation. So what do you do? You know, he says, I'm a management consultant. I do mergers and acquisitions. You know, I work for so-and and so-and-so. I run the Chicago office, so-and-so and so-and-so. So then he asked me, so what do you do? Now, when you're Vice Provost, Associate Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Educational Achievement, first off, you don't want to tell anybody that title because it's way too daggone long. But also you ask the question, if I say what that title is, what's the response that I'm going to get? And so I told him, I was the Vice Provost, Associate Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Educational Achievement. I was University of Wisconsin-Madison's Chief Diversity Officer. His response to me was so wonderful. He says to me, and this is my favorite question. Students in the room, anytime you want to stump somebody, this is the question you ask them. So, can you say more? Best question in the world, I'm telling you. Write that down, that's money. Right? So can you say more? I said, yeah, of course. I said, well, in my work, I focus on access to the institution. I've got retention and leadership programs. We got research stuff we're doing. I've got these things we're working on with the faculty around general education diversity requirements. Not just getting folks in, but how do we ensure that all of our students are ready to lead in a diverse world and have cultural competence and skills and abilities? He said, oh my gosh, I just think that's so important. He said, because we are struggling to recruit at our company for those very reasons. And I am so glad that there's somebody on your side of the aisle who's working on these issues in higher ed, because your graduates are my students. So if they don't get what they need to get while in higher ed, they come to my environment and create all kinds of challenges and ripple effects. And he said something interesting. He said, well, the challenge that we have is that we can't recruit enough diverse folks, racial and ethnically, particularly from a domestic lens. He said, but the greater domestic and international issue, the greatest domestic and globalization issues, he said, I tell you what, this whole generation of millennials that we're seeing, he said, there's a couple issues with them. He said, analytically, from a thinking and problem-solving perspective, they're as sharp as they come. And they're the same as what we see at the global international level. He said, but there's some other things here that are a little bit different about this domestic context. First, he said, they have no grit and resilience. They want everything today. They get their offer, and then the next day, they think they need to be getting promoted and have the corner office. It's the persistence of now. The other thing he said is particularly our majority millennials, he said, too many of them yet and still are not having the types of fundamental experiences with diversity that have prepared them to be leaders in groups and teams once they get to my environment. He said, that is a problem. Millennials in the room, you will be asked the question, so tell me about your experience with diversity. Not saying it'll be the question that you will be asked that you won't get the job off of it, but I am saying that it is a question that you have to be prepared to answer. Not just preparing students, but also the work we're doing in terms of research and scholarship, domestic and international, AFAM studies, women's studies, disability studies, LGBT studies, also a part of a strategic agenda of diversity. And what sits at the core of the model, and I think this is so important, and I put it at the center of the model, because I wanted to imply its importance as the glue that brings it all together, is are our environments multicultural and inclusive and engaged campus environments? Or do folks who sit outside of the majority feel as if they're catching hell every day, irrespective of how that identity is defined? Do they feel as if they're catching hell and they're excluded every day when they walk to campus, when they walk to class, when they sit in the front row or they sit in the middle and they feel like they're being serialed out, or they're not invited to join a study group, or perhaps they are? When notes aren't shared and notes live embedded in the context of crates and in files that have lived in fraternity and sorority house for generations, creating inequity of what the outcomes look like, because some folks coming in with the game plan and some folks just coming in. Ignorance and hate bubbling just beneath the surface of our campus culture. The image that you see behind me of a lifelike figure at the Badger House, sitting on the ledge, doing this, looking like 21st century strange fruit, looking as if this body is hanging. When young people were asked the question, "What were you doing?" we just thought it would be funny to take the lifelike Spider-Man doll that wears the black suit and to throw that individual over the side with a belt around its neck. What became even worse when we double-clicked into the why, we weren't mocking race, we weren't mocking strange fruit, we weren't mocking the perversion of black bodies. What we were mocking was suicide. Suicide. And that's no better. In fact, that is also as bad. And when we ask the question, folks are crying and in tears, and they're saying, "I didn't think and I didn't know," and you're getting ready to graduate from the great University of Wisconsin at Madison. That's a problem, because the educational context of your experience in class and outside of class should have provided for you some checks and balances that you might just think about. Throwing a lifelike black figure over the side of a rail by the neck with a belt might look like something that was just a little bit sketchy, if not totally over the boundaries of what you should be doing at all. Sigma Alpha Epsilon, Oklahoma University, so interesting. So interesting, right? I know there's been a lot of conversation about that at the great University of Alabama, because I know you have your own history and your own challenges around this. Key difference: video. Digital disruptor. Not one person, multiple. Everybody knew the words. It was like they were singing the damn Drake song. My word. These racial themed parties, we see them all over the place. Auburn, Arizona State, Baylor, Clemson, Cal Poly, Colorado State, Duke, Dartmouth, Georgia State, Johns Hopkins. I could go on and 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 on. I was tracking these things for some research I was doing, and I just was like, the hell with it. I'm just going to call it racism and keep on moving. Old world racism we see thematically playing out in these venues and these events. Perversions of urban and hip-hop culture. Poverty, stereotypes, the mocking of immigrant and new minority communities. We see it play out all the time, disrupting the core of the culture of our campus environments, elevating the need for us again to think about how are we being intentional in informing the mental models of students, the mental models of faculty, the mental models of staff. Not because it's the morally right thing to do, but because we're trying to create a context of 21st century leaders and preparing folks for the world that we live in today. You talk to any Fortune 5 CEO, any executive development company, any research talking about 21st century leadership skills, and these are the things they're talking about. Thinking and problem solving, communication in written and oral forms, being technologically savvy, being digitally literate, the ability to lead, and hear me now, millennials, lead and follow in teams, and being culturally competent and capable of engaging and interacting across difference. My work is about this idea of artful science. Again, I have no magic bullets, and so the first principle that I'll offer as I move to close is that I have no magic bullets. The work is incredibly hard and it is incredibly difficult. The second thing that I offer is that this work takes time and commitment. It's not simply saying, oh, we've appointed a new diversity officer and now we have panacea. It's understanding that it takes time and commitment and engagement by multiple people putting their hands on the wheel. A shared responsibility of change, a shared responsibility of evolving culture, a shared responsibility of creating a context of inclusion. We got to be like the wolf and not like the cheetah. The cheetah will sit high on the plain of the Serengeti, waiting for that antelope to appear off in the distance. And with startling hurricane-like force, the fastest accelerating creature on the planet will go tearing after it. Similar to what happens when diversity crises oftentimes happen on our campuses. We go tearing after it. Shoo. Capable of traversing about 300 meters at top velocity. And whether successful or not in accomplishing its goal of capturing prey, will go back to the plane and go like this. And reset. Hunting generally singularly or maybe in pairs, but generally singularly. By comparison, the wolf moves collectively over, not 300 meters. Wolf can move relentlessly without stopping nearly for 3 days. Found not in one isolated part of the world, wolf can live in nearly any terrain, whether mountainous, arid, jungle, or desert-like. Collectively, collaboratively, everybody playing a role in the conversation of getting the job done, just like what must be the case in the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the work of strategic diversity leadership. So often we see diversity crisis moments hit up. Internal and external stakeholders respond. There oftentimes are protests and demands. Then there's declarations of support. We support the key values of diversity, equity, and inclusion in our environment. Indeed, they are so hallowed and important to the very future and foundation of what we believe. I have never felt more certain in that, and the blah, 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 blah. Although, I will say I've been very impressed with the president of the University of Oklahoma and the courage and conviction of that brother in trying to get something done. Oftentimes in that work, we commission a planning group, because you know in higher education, we can't think without a planning group. And we deliberate and discuss, and we discuss and we deliberate, and we pontificate, we theorize, and we quantify and qualify, and we framework and create, we ideate and develop, and then we develop the new plan. And we're going to improve the demographics, we're going to diverse educate, we're going to improve the climate, and we're going to create a chief diversity officer to, hear me now, tell everybody what to do. A little bit of secret. President, provost, deans don't tell everybody what to do. Ain't no chief diversity officer coming up in anywhere telling everybody what to do. Just another leader playing a role, trying to make a difference, trying to skew towards something that lives in the realm of possibility. We accept plans. Once we accept plans, we often delay in implementation. No one knows what the heck is happening. We got a whole goal set. No one's talking about activating change. No one's talking about the tactics we're going to use to make the stuff happen. How are we going to pay for it? You know, we would never do a technology plan like that. We'd never do a strategic enrollment management plan like that. We'd never do a new plan for a new athletic facility like that. But somehow we expect diversity plans to get done without money, without resources, and without accountability. And that's what oftentimes leads to superficial implementations of our efforts. How do we be not cheetah-like but wolf-like? Strategic and focused, connected and synergized, collaborative, building not just vertical structures, but lateral relationships. How do we bring those things together? Everybody playing a role. One of my favorite leaders in the academy is University of Miami President Donna Shalala. And one of the things that President Shalala will often talk about when she was lecturing about organizational culture and organizational change is she would talk about, you got to put the lawn chairs out. And I heard her tell this very compelling lecture one time. She arrived at the University of Miami, and upon arrival there, she was not satisfied with the student culture. She said it felt too much like a party school, too much like a commuter school. She wanted a more engaged intellectual culture. And so the first thing that she did when she got there is she didn't say, I'm going to change the policy of who can have a car, when, and where. First thing she did is she put lawn chairs out across campus and lawn chairs in buildings, because what she noted was there was no daggone place for anybody to sit and have community. Next thing she did is she created vending machines and fruit stands and juice stands because they needed those things to create the context of community and culture. Something very easy that became important, and then moving through to more intrusive things like saying first-year students can't have a car until. You can't do this until. More intrusive policy changes. The question I always ask in terms of diversity, where are the lawn chairs that we could put out today to get something done? That to me oftentimes comes back to saying, where are the critical leverage points, right? Where are the critical leverage points? Let's say we really wanted to proactively get at this idea of preparing all of our students for a diverse and global world. Critical leverage points would be the general education requirements of our core curriculum. Critical leverage points would be at summer orientation. Critical leverage points would be as a part of something that was baked into the experience of every Greek letter organization. Critical leverage points would be something that lived across all these spaces. One of the important points of leading change is understanding where are the critical leverage points that we have to engage to make something happen. Diversity plans can't live without being hooked up to air. Got to have some accountability systems, got to have some infrastructure to make stuff happen, and got to have resources. Let me say a little bit more about that. In my national survey of institutions across the country, we got about 789 responses back. What we found that was about 39% of campuses were reporting out on their diversity activities regularly. About 46% were elevating that up to the board level and giving board level reports. But when we double clicked in and moved out of the very general into something more specific, what we found was that only 21% said that diversity was a part of the merit or the annual performance reviews of administrators. Only 10% said it was at all, in any way, connected to the work and the responsibilities of faculty. And only about 17% said that they had some type of formal institutional scorecard. And so in this, what we see is a whole bunch of conversation, but not necessarily a whole bunch of air at the most powerful ways. Accountability can be engaged institutionally, and I think doing those reports are an important part of it. But there's also some other systems that can be turned if institutions and leaders have the courage as a group to say, this is what we want to do. Chief Diversity Officer Point Leadership. I wrote the book, The Chief Diversity Officer. I've helped so many institutions think about these roles. The thing I say is there are major trends in higher ed, corporate America, not-for-profits. They have these executive level responsibilities to be the point leader for the campus. They should be reporting in to presidents or provosts or maybe both. Some of them have vertically integrated portfolios with staff and units that report up, and they got to have some resources to be able to stimulate something. Having a big title and no staff and no money is not the look for getting anything done. So it's important to not just think about the role, but how do we embed the role and design the role, not to be a lone wolf, but to be a part of a pack and to be a part of a more coordinated, sequenced system of activities. Senior leadership, so important to advancing an agenda. Senior leadership has to have a bias towards action and be innovators, stepping up and stepping out from comfort and convention against the grain to get something done. Senior leaders have an ability to set the vision, create the broader narrative, help to steward and shape resource flow, helping to make sure diversity is not the priority or the only priority, but a priority. And in times of change and transition, when new presidents come, when new provost comes, power is lost or acquired. Issues are elevated or subverted. Yours time as an institution is one of change and shifting as your DNA is evolving. Will you reach in and further engage issues of diversity, or will you allow it to continue to sit on the margin? Will you run towards your legacy and your history and embrace the full possibility of this great institution, not just being the third highest number of African Americans, but being the highest number of African American graduates, the greatest number of African American mathematicians, to truly make it a mark of excellence and not being Diversity is so important to this institution on Saturdays. I want it to be important on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And my last point, shared with me by Ohio State University, now deceased, Vice Provost Emeritus Frank Hale Jr. Commitment without currency is counterfeit. Commitment without currency is counterfeit, and please let no one tell you any different. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Questions? No? Do I have time for a couple questions or no? Couple questions. Is that a floating mic back there for questions or no? I just can't. My eyes are a little bad. I can't see. No? All right. Stand and verbalize. Questions, comments, anybody, question they'd like me to speak to in the short time that we have left. Questions from anybody? Yes, sir.
I'd like you to, I really like the concept of the chairs.
Yes.
The chairs. I really like that concept. Could you tell me more?
Tell you more. Great question. I love it. I love it. The chairs, so what can be done very easily wherever it is that you sit, right? So, not getting lost in the complexity of the challenge, but really trying to find something that's doable today that one may be able to do. So, for example, if you are a faculty member and you're teaching your course, one of the easy things that you can do to ensure that individuals are not being excluded from team-centered educational and learning environments is to randomize the group development process. So rather than letting students just choose who's going to be in their group, randomize it. That's an easy thing to do. That's a low-hanging fruit to do that can immediately have value in terms of how those groups come together. And then you can double down on that with intentional ways that you want to shape what the group is doing. Now you've taken something that could have been very problematic for certain students that were not included and engaged, and very easily made it something that was deeply embracing of diversity, that was driving towards those skill sets that I'm talking about here, and it was done with no resources. It was done very simplistically and very elegantly. Other questions, other comments, anybody? Yes, ma'am.
So I've been following the discourse around the Oklahoma University thing, and one of the things I've heard is that the idea behind fraternities and sororities is completely counter to the idea of diversity, in that
It's a great question. You know, I went to a university, Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, which is very similar to the University of Alabama in that I think about 70+% of all students are members of Greek letter organizations. And the tradition and the history of that institution is similar to this in that it was a deep part of the foundation of what defines student life. You know, one of the things that I don't believe is that we should be throwing out the entirety of the Greek system because we have some challenges associated with it. And so while there may be some aspects of replication and homogeneity that's a part of that experience, I also think that there's an opportunity for us to really build out diversity within that experience and to create and to hold those institutions to the standards upon which they were built upon. None of them were built upon, well, I won't say that, that would be untrue. In the best of cases, they're built upon a foundation of leadership development. They're built upon a foundation of community and brotherhood and connectivity. They're built upon a foundation of something deeply positive. Rather than throwing out the baby with the bathwater, how do we evolve it? And I think it is possible. And even beyond it being possible, I think it's unrealistic to do anything but evolve what is, because we will never eradicate what is. Other questions from anyone? Yes, sir, in the back. Yes. Great question. You know, if we look at the history, what we know is that students have always defined the context of what will be on our campuses with respect to diversity. And that's students broad in coalition. Students are the ultimate consumer and always have the ability, if they so choose, to skew towards having their voices be heard, can shape the narrative of what is. But that's talking about political engagement. To take it out of the context of political engagement and to answer your question in another way, I think that students can be incredible carriers of their own empowerment. And I see that happening through like-minded students coming together and say, hey, we're going to create a dialogue group in our residence hall, and this is what we're going to be about. Or we're going to create a new student organization which is about the mosaic of diversity and coming together across group to engage these issues. One of my mentees, Stephen Olakara, who graduated from UW-Madison 2 years ago, Stephen was an amazing student leader, became president of his student body, raised about $500,000 before he left the institution, graduated summa cum laude, Truman Fellow, finalist for the Rhodes Scholarship, like that dude. Stephen Olakara created a social impact not-for-profit organization when he left the University of Wisconsin-Madison and got 7-figure venture capital to focus into a diversity issue, which I think is one of the greatest issues of our time, which is how do we bring together R's and D's, blues and reds, to really engage the important civic issues that have to live in the middle for us to have a great society and a great country. It's called the Millennial Leadership Project. Get at him on Twitter, get at him on social media. I know he'd love to share more about what he's doing. The Millennial Leadership Project. Yeah, great question, though. Anyone else? Others? Yes, sir.
I've been teaching for a long time, and I'm tired of talking about diversity.
Yes, sir.
I'm trying to figure out how to get more engaged, because we're always the ones who have to bring it up, as it were. And it just, from the time we've been in school, we've always been fighting. I know we have to stay in the fight, stay engaged, stay in the battlefield and all that.
Yeah.
But as a chief diversity officer, I'm sure you got weary sometimes. Do you have any inspirational thoughts for some of us who've been on the battlefield for a while?
Absolutely. Great question. Great question. Give some love for that question. One of my dear mentors is the legendary sociology professor Ronald Taylor, who wrote the first book on black males. He wrote the first book on the African American family, and it was my privilege to be his assistant vice provost. He was vice provost for multicultural and international affairs, and he leaned in and made me an assistant vice provost at 28 years old, which, as you all know, is very uncommon. One of the lessons that he shared with me early on, which deeply informed my practice, was the importance of me understanding that there was only so much that I was going to be able to get done in this work, and I had to find spaces where I could walk away from it and let it be what it was going to be, or else it would corrupt me from the inside out. It would kill my spirit. And so one of the things that I've tried to make a part of the narrative of my leadership is that there are times when I put my hands up and I say no mas, and I step back, because I think that's incredibly important to preserving our mental health, our physical health, and indeed being able to come back the next day and fight the good fight and continue forward. That's a piece of it. Another piece of it as well is that I think it's important for us to depersonalize the work. And it's so hard to take it out of a personalized context and put it into a third-party context. Because what I found is when I personalize the work, I can't let it go. And beyond that, I get irate. And there's a burning rage, to quote James Baldwin, right, which is deep inside of me, and I can't let it go. And I think that it's important at times to depersonalize the work and step back. Those are some things that I've done. At the end of the day, it's incredibly hard because the issues just get stronger and stronger and more challenged. And while we take 2-3 steps forward, things happen that make us feel as if there's so much more yet to do. How we doing? Take one more question. Yes, sir. All the way in the back. About what, sir? The money. The money. Absolutely. So one of the things that I wrote about in Strategic Diversity Leadership, and I also wrote about in the American Council of Education monograph that I did, A Matter of Excellence, was I really wanted to talk about financing diversity. And in that, I talked about the critical importance of a couple things. Number one, that we should use classic financial principles to accrue diversity-themed resources. Those financial principles might be, we're going to take a 1% give back across all budgets at the University of Alabama because diversity is a shared priority, not just in symbol, but in material. Or even a 0.5% or a 0.25%. We now have the resources that we need, and no one has to close shop off of that 0.5% or 0.25%. That's a technique that can be used. Another recommendation that I oftentimes give is when you construct the diversity committee, have somebody from the vice president for budget and planning on the committee so that they can be thinking about where the money's coming from as you're building the plan. A third recommendation that I oftentimes speak to is when do we engage in diversity-themed fundraising campaigns where we have a campaign which is focused on strategically engaging these issues with a business case, where we have annual calls, where we're looking for transformative gifts, where we have targeted segmented mailing towards underrepresented faculty or alumni of color, emails and targeted segmentation to the broad community for folks who just want to be engaged in diversity efforts, but you put that in the strategic strike zone of fundraising. All those are easy things to do, and we just don't do them with any level of scale. And I think doing those things with a level of scale allows us to create new resources. That issue of the budget reallocation piece, that does come with some levels of complexity and a great level of commitment. A final thing is, on Saturdays, again, diversity is important. It'd be nice to get a piece of that revenue, wouldn't it? That licensing and merchandising revenue, small percentage of it. Man, that send a powerful message, Coach Saban. We love to get it. Just a 0.5%, just a 0.5% off of every jersey, a 0.5% off of every helmet, a 0.5% off of every bobblehead, a 0.5% off of every ticket to a game. Now we got resources, and it's coming and it's connected to the conversations of diversity. How do we think creatively about that? You've been phenomenal. My visit and my residency has been great. I'll be here tomorrow too. Thank you so much.